I know I said I was not doing Superman anymore, but there you go, I fixed it. With the DCU getting ready to release its second movie, a lot of buzz has been going around as to what to expect. Good buzz, bad buzz, who knows? At least we are talking about it. It does seem like it's a pretty anticipated movie, but of course, with anything coming out of this new universe, we have to deal with a lot of shallow and directionless hate. Supergirl is a movie set to be a close adaptation of the Tom King story, Woman of Tomorrow. And for some of my problems with Tom King, this is actually a pretty good book. In fact, this is one of my favorite comic books of all time. I read this before seeing True Grit, and after watching the movie, I was like, it's not as cool as the Supergirl comic. So if this movie manages to capture even a fraction of the comic's magic, I think it'll be good. The comic follows Kara and Ruthie as they travel through space looking for revenge against the Thug Krem, who's just a regular guy, but he manages to do some pretty impressive stuff throughout the comic run. As the story goes on, we see the two go from planet to planet, from location to location, looking for clues on where to find Krem as we follow along on his path of debauchery and evil deeds as he's running away from Supergirl. Now, for anyone who has read the comic, you will notice that there's some differences between what we see in the comic versus what we see in the trailer, and with the addition of someone new in the trailer, we might get a different story as to what we would have seen if it was a direct adaptation of the comic. From that description given, I know you're probably asking, how could this bring so much hate and anger, right? Well, honestly, I wouldn't say this movie is being received negatively in general, because a lot of people who are being negative towards it have zero to no knowledge about anything, so they're really just mad about little things around the first trailer. It's also pretty clear we're getting some carried over hate from things like Superman, which they can't really hate Supergirl for the same reasons, like it being done better before, because they'll have to give props to the Supergirl show from the CW.
You can't touch me without hurting yourself.
That's why he brought me.
So it's a lot of easy competition out there for Supergirl, except for the Flash movie, which I've seen a lot of people actually switch up on the Supergirl representation of going in that movie. Before, when that movie was initially released, she was touted as one of the positives of the movie, but no one really put her up there as a top tier Supergirl. But since, we're getting something new, the old stuff automatically is better. Because of this Supergirl's different portrayal at the end of Superman, it was a given that she was going to get some flack by the time her movie was going to be released. Now, with the only complaints before the marketing cycle for this movie begun being not liking a drunk Supergirl, you would expect the discourse and criticism around this marketing campaign to be pretty simple and not overblown, right? Well, instead of a well thought out discussion on what way this movie could be adapted from the comic, we are getting a drove of people asking questions that could easily be googled. Why can a Kryptonian get drunk? Why is crypto in this movie again? Why does this movie look like Guardians of the Galaxy? All these questions could be answered with just reading the comic book, but we can't expect people to read original materials of adaptations. These are comic book movies we're talking about. After all, if you're a comic book fan, you don't have to read comic books. Of course, a lot of these questions, when being asked to actually obtain an answer, they were being used to negatively dump on the new Supergirl movie. Because if these people were really hungry for answers to the questions, they would have gone to Google and searched up any of these questions and they would get an answer easily. Or better yet, they could read the comic at the end of the first teaser trailer. It's hilarious to me that a lot of people use criticism about not knowing what this story is going to be, or the trailer not perfectly portraying what this whole movie is going to be, even though it's just a teaser trailer, and still refusing to read the comic book. It would be understandable if this was one of those movies where they just said it was being adapted from a comic book or the storyline was similar to a comic book, but this was first named exactly as the comic book was named. It was talked about like a one-to-one adaptation, even though it's not going to be a one-to-one adaptation. But I think the fact that this trailer had the comic book it was referencing at the end of it, and a lot of people refuse to read the comic book but instead go about talking about this trailer and the concept of the movie and the story and the characters involved without reading the comic book it's referencing. Of course, none of these talking points actually stuck around long enough to matter, because everyone who actually cared read the comic book and got the answer, or had already read the comic book and didn't have to ask these questions. So with no other viable way to create hate around this movie without reading the comic book, we had to move on to a new phase of attack, which was of course coming after the people making the movie, who we don't know who they are. So we blame James Gunn. This way, we could just reuse everything we said before Superman came out and while Superman was out, and Peacemaker and everything else, and just shove it into this movie. Why does the movie look the way it does? We don't blame the director, we don't blame the cinematographer, we blame the producer, James Gunn. Why does the trailer have music? Of course, James Gunn. Why does crypto appear in the newspaper with Superman on it? Has to be James Gunn. Obviously, the only reason why he would be getting so much hate about the Supergirl movie is because his name is the most recognizable thing attached to it, because I don't hear Kevin Feige's name being brought up as much as James Gunn is. But the ironic thing is, he's not the only one in charge of DC. He didn't write this, he didn't direct this, and he doesn't have any connection with the original comic. So of course, this talking point is very easily laughed off. Finally, we have the most recent marketing run for this movie, where crypto was used very heavily in the promotion. Strangely enough, this is the one thing that has attracted the most hate and negative feedback, with so many people upset to see how much love crypto is getting from DC. Some go as far as to say they now hate crypto because he took so much time from Superman in the Superman movie and now is going to do the same with Supergirl. The only thing is, this ad was for the unrelated event called the Puppy Bowl. How dare they use the puppy from their upcoming movie to promote the upcoming movie during the event about puppies. Also, I'd like to add, if anyone is mad about seeing crypto in the trailer, just take that as a sign they didn't care enough to read the Woman of Tomorrow comic. So why aren't any of these talking points sticking? Obviously, it's because this movie isn't even out yet, but deeper than that is because there isn't really a direction to take. Not enough people know about this character or the comic to probably hate on it. And the types to hate on the Supergirl trailer before it releases aren't the type to be big fans of the original Supergirl show, which was more of a Superman gender swap show and not really a Supergirl show, but that's a topic for another day. I see so many people struggling so hard to find something negative to say that they were desperate enough to say Lobo looked bad. But if they just read the comic, there is an immediate go-to topic to bet your hate tokens on, and it's the visuals from the trailer not being what a lot of people expected. Honestly, I think this is the only thing I've seen a lot of fans really complain about, and to be honest, I fully get it. The art of Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is so colorful and beautiful that it would be disappointing to see this movie coming out looking like Batman vs Superman, but I don't think it would be that drab. Look at it like this. We actually got a lot more colorful shots in the trailer, but because a bulk of what we've seen is seemingly in one place, it's easy to think the whole movie might look like this. So keep your heads up and we will get some color, hopefully. I do still think I've seen a lot of people take this too far and seem to expect a one-to-one translation of the art to the live action, which I just don't think would fit the tone of this movie, especially because it seems like they're really focusing more on the more tragic things that happen in the comic than the more adventure-y things that happen in the comic. All in all, I think there is a lot of excitement for this movie. I'm happy to see it's one of the most anticipated movies of 2026. I wouldn't have expected that from the Supergirl movie. Honestly, I think my expectations for DC were so lowered by the streak we got of just ass, and with Superman actually being good along with Creature Commandos and Peacemaker, I have faith in DC again. I think this year, if they manage to pull it off, might be one of the best years for DC. Call me crazy, but I think Supergirl, Lanterns, and Clayface is actually a really good lineup for a year to follow up Superman. I know a lot of people are kind of conflicted about something like Clayface because who asked for him? But I think doing movies like those could actually really help DC attract more fans and maybe create a new draw for the universe itself. But what do I know? Subscribe.